members, and from Fort Bend County, and then we have one from Colorado County. Larry, there you are, Larry. So everybody, this is where everything started. Everything began at this particular location. If it hadn't been for Stephen F. Austin, I don't know what would be like. And I've told you this before, probably some of you have heard me say this. I go to conventions and you have a name tag, and on that name tag you have Austin County. And many people would come up to me and say, "Oh, you're from Austin." And I would say, "No, I'm from Austin County." That's where everything began. And last year, no one asked me that, so I guess they're finally learning where Austin County is and the importance of this county. So I'll turn the program over to Bryan. He'll explain what he's going to do, but he's done a super job out here. He is, of course, with the Texas Historical Commission.
Thank you all for coming out. As Grace mentioned, I've been working with the Historical Commission since the site's transfer in 2008. For those of you that have not been here, maybe since that time, you might have questions about what's going on in this building. So just real quickly, I'm going to be running through some of our plans as part of this program today. What had been the Josie Store Museum, which lived on state property beginning from the early 1970s until 2009, this building was generously donated to the state so that we could occupy a visitor center and start planning for some interpretation here at the site. The collection was not donated. Most of the collection is not related to the story we are here to tell. So most of it is not colonial. It's not things that we can curate effectively and utilize in an Austin Colony Museum. So we still partner with, it's actually our friends organization that both owns that collection and supports us. So we're looking at various options for a new home for them. The local community comes to us a lot and says, when are you going to put all that cool stuff back in here? And of course, our problem is, from a state curatorial standpoint, this is a great building. It's one of the oldest buildings in the county. It's also, by modern architectural standards, the equivalent of a barn. And so, from a security standpoint, from a fire security standpoint, we can't justifiably put artifacts back in here. There were thefts in the collection of the old Josie Store Museum, so we don't really want the state's name to inspire more of that kind of trouble. Not to mention, and I'll get into this a little bit more, we're going to have a very interesting museum operational model that I hope you'll appreciate and maybe help us with as we go forward. I didn't pay Grace to make that first comment, but I would welcome you to Austin. So while she's had that confusion in the past, people that lived here in San Felipe did refer to the town as Austin pretty regularly. So the very first newspaper printed here by G.B. Cotton, if you go back and look at the masthead of the Texas Gazette, it usually says it was printed at Austin. So sometimes I appreciate that confusion, but I understand Grace's frustration. So welcome today. What I'm going to talk to you about essentially is how we're looking at building a meaningful museum experience here. And I mentioned it being 72 and or 87 years in the making because there is a lot of odd political history to this site and how it has developed or not. It's a unique opportunity because there is no museum of a large scale being planned anywhere in Texas on a theme as big as this one that I know of. So we have a chance to do something that no one else is even thinking about right now. So just to give you a little sense of what happened here at San Felipe, obviously the town was burned during the runaway scrape. The town was lost. Stephen F. Austin died that same year, so a lot of its value in terms of the colonial history was seemingly lost right there at the time of the Revolution. In the 1920s, the local community starts thinking about ways to commemorate the site. What do we do so that no one forgets this history? As you can imagine, many small communities are thinking about the centennial coming up. Stephen F. Austin's remains have been moved to the state cemetery just a decade before. So there's a lot of heritage-minded, heritage tourism seeds getting planted. The Alamo is emerging to a degree. And so the locals here are wondering what's going to happen to all these stories that really aren't being told anywhere significantly. The first effort to give this property to the state of Texas took place in 1925. And the state said, thanks but no thanks. History's kind of a loser. We don't have a lot of money. We're not really anxious to do that. And so over 15 years, there was a discussion between the locals and the state about who would own this property, who would develop it. In that intervening time, practically everything you saw coming in that has a memorial component was done by the local community. The well, which was encased in concrete in the 1920s, late 1920s, the obelisk piece, which was staged in 1928, which is the same year as the well. Those things were all done before the state owned the site. The centennial statue was planned, of course, as part of the centennial celebration, still at a time that the state did not own the site. And then even the first replica cabin was built here in '34, and centennial planning before state ownership. So in 1940, the deal breaker, or the deal maker, I should say, is that the city offered up close to 600 acres of land on the river bottom that became the state park. And the state was much more excited about having 600 acres of land to develop than just this little historic plot. And so that got the state ownership confirmed. A lot of the early resources was put into the campground, to the golf course eventually, to the little drive-down area close to us here. In the state's mind, we already had a memorial park. You had a statue, you had monuments, you had all that stuff. What else did you need? Come read it, come have a good time, have a picnic, think about Stephen F. Austin, life was good. In the 1930s, that's when these memorials were being staged, like I said, so here's pictures of the statue being put in. Just as a trivia game for any of you looking to play, there's two neat things about the Austin statue. It was originally intended to be staged in Brazoria County, which was a clear indication that just as the locals feared, nobody knew what happened to San Felipe and nobody cared at the time the centennial was being planned, except for local people. So the legislature was going to have that statue put in Brazoria County because everyone knew that's where all the Austin stuff happened. So a letter writing campaign here redirected that. The statue was commissioned for the centennial. It was staged in the fall of 1938, so it was not here. You'll see centennial reports about a lot of these statuary that suggest they were in place when people were celebrating the centennial. Most of them had funding issues that caused a delay. Not to mention, as an employee of the government, I think I can fairly say, the legislature is not real in tune with how long it's going to take an artist to do something like that. Anyway, there's an image of that first that first replica cabin building that was built in 1934. That picture was probably taken about 1940. Of course, you can see the centennial right there in front of it. So between 1940, when the state takes ownership, and I could say today, but I listed it as 2011, these are the things that were done to improve the site. In the 1970s, because this building, which was not on state property at the time, was jeopardized by the construction of the Brazos River Bridge, a partnership was made with Parks and Wildlife to move in onto state property and run a private, nonprofit museum on state property as an additional resource. The state loved it because it required no significant staffing commitment, volunteers run the museum, it was a win-win for them, and then the collection evolved over time during some of that early days, although most of it was already obtained. The only other improvement to the site, really since that time, outside of conservation and some restoration work, is the addition of the outdoor panels that you saw. We're now working on this interior installation. I know some of you are looking at that, and I apologize for some of the kinks that we're still working out, including lighting, including frames that, as my grandfather liked to say in his carpentry days, somebody measured once, right? So we're having our frames redone. But anyway, that's the only improvement the state has made up to now. The plan is to build an Austin Colony Museum. So I get asked in the community all the time, what are you going to do with an Austin Colony Museum? What's out there? What kind of stuff could you show off? And the good news is there is a lot of good stuff. The challenging news is, as I kind of alluded earlier, our operational model is going to be much different than most of the museums in your communities, where people give them great stuff and they get to conserve it and display it and share those stories. Most of the stuff we want already belongs to somebody else. So there are going to be a lot of politics to figuring out how we can negotiate getting things here. It's a great opportunity. When I got involved in this business almost 15 years ago, I was working as a consultant advisor with a lot of small museums, and everyone believed the way you get people to come back is you have a lot of temporary exhibits or you change things out all the time. Well, we will be testing that theory by necessity, because we're going to have to change things out a lot. So we'll be working on themes with curators in Austin. I'm sure once we build the building here, we'll have to have a full-time curator that works for us, who's responsible for this process. But there's some really neat stuff that we know is out there. Obviously, there are a lot of images of Stephen F. Austin, many of which belong to the state. So from that perspective, we can provide kind of an historic view shed of what Stephen F. Austin looked like and what people perceive of him as the father of Texas. There are some very specific artifacts like the registro, the register of all 300 families, that belongs to the General Land Office and is still in their collection. That's an actual image of the book right there, which, if you all have been following the story at all, they've recently gone through a significant conservation program. So when I first went to Austin, well, I'd seen it before, but when I first went to Austin working for the state 4 years ago, I was shocked when they walked out with the book and laid it in front of me and said, let's look through and see what we got. Because, of course, a lot of curators don't really treat things quite that way. No offense to the GLO, but they're deeply proud of that book and realized over the last couple of years maybe we shouldn't be touching it so much. So they've digitized it, it's completely digitized. They have replicated it. I have a replica copy of it here today. It's not really part of the dog and pony show, but if you want to see it before you leave, I will call it out. I'll be happy to show it to you.
Is it available online?
It is available. Well, actually, sorry. In a comprehensive format, I don't believe it is yet available online. That's going to be an issue for the GLO to resolve. I can't imagine they won't make it available online. Now bear in mind, if you're familiar with this resource, or certainly if you're not, it's in Spanish. It's very much boilerplate. The documents page by page are almost identical, but it lists each of the old Oldtimer families and has brief survey sketches of their property. So we're excited to have it here as an interpretive tool. What I'm waiting for, there was an historic translation of the registro commissioned by the Republican government, the Republic of Texas, around 1840. I'd like to be able to marry up some of the historic Spanish with the translation so that most of my visitors could better understand what they're looking at. And so that may happen over the next year to a year and a half. But it's a wonderful resource. When I went there 4 years ago, I joked with the guys and said, hey, we're building a museum at San Felipe soon. We'd like to bring it home. And they said, yeah, good luck with that. So, now that they have a replica that they're going to be using for tours, and they've put this into a conservation model, I'm a little more excited that I'm going to be driving the Brinks truck over there once we get serious about it. Anyway, just for giggles here, the registro has a lot of interesting things about it. It talks about surveying and the distribution of land, of course, in Austin's colony. It's also one of the few places, and this title page is intended to be an exemplar of how the documents are recorded. So Austin signs every one of them, but on the title page is one of the few places historically that he signed the title impresario. So that's a fun thing to have, just as people make that connection, Father of Texas-wise. But we're very thrilled to have this resource. It's 600 pages. It's a bear to deal with. It was $1,000 a piece to get the replicas done, and at one point they thought it might cost closer to $10,000 to have individual replicated pieces done. So we're being very careful with it. It's not something we juggle around every day, but we're thrilled to have it, and like I said, I'll be happy to share it with you today if you'd like. A lot of people, of course, are familiar with the desk, the land office desk that resided here in the Josie store for so many years. There's a book waiting to be written about that piece alone in terms of preservation history. It's a very unusual story, how it left Texas, how it came to come back, and how it's going to play out as we go forward. If you're not aware, currently it is at the Bob Bullock Museum, so it is on display there. It has been conserved. Yes, ma'am.
There have been several articles recently about the mansion, governor's mansion
Yes.
in Austin.
Yes.
And they're moving some of the historical artifacts back, and they mentioned Stephen F. Austin's writing desk.
They're talking about a laptop piece, I believe, that is part of the preservation's. I know the Preservation Board does own a smaller, almost like a 19th century portable tuck under the arm piece, and I believe that that's been staged in the governor's office in the past. This right now has a standing loan agreement between the Friends organization. The state does not own this desk. I'll be very blunt with you in saying, when they gave us the building and said, are there any artifacts you might want? We said, well, yeah, we want that one. And they had no interest in giving us the desk. So I presume they'll be very excited to put it in a museum here, and it would be one of the pieces that should be able to stay here long term. But the state doesn't own it. We've helped broker the conservation of it, and it's display at the Bob Bullock. If you go to the Bullock, it's on the second floor in the Mexican jail cell exhibit. It's one of the pieces that's lit up behind glass. There are some other more fine art images, of course, related to Austin and Austin's colony that would be interesting if we could get them here. This one is probably pie in the sky and possibility, simply because of where it lives and where it's been. It is in the House chamber at the Capitol building. But it's a wonderful, wonderful piece. And of course, we centerpiece it in one of our panel exhibits because most of our visitors and even people connected to the story don't realize everyone in here are famous people, known people that we can identify, with the exception of Mr. Report here. The historians have said is probably a newbie to the colony who's wearing his store-bought clothes and coming to report the Indian raid that he's all worked up about while Austin puts on his John Wayne Swagger and says, whatever. So I don't know that I'll ever get the McAuley painting here. Again, it has some very interesting history too. If you're not familiar, after the first Capitol burned and they went through the process of planning the second Capitol building, and there was a committee put together with $10,000 to buy art for the new building. And they set out several criteria. It might be a surprise to you to know Stephen F. Austin did not meet that initial criteria in terms of people they needed a portrait of. And so Mr. McAuley in his lifetime desperately wanted this piece to belong to the state of Texas. In all honesty, he was a struggling artist and he desperately wanted the state to pay him pretty handsomely for that piece of work. It didn't happen. After his death, another artist purchased the piece from his estate, donated it to the state of Texas, and it now lives in the House chamber.
Will you come to the bar I have shaded for you? Your bed shall be of roses bespangled with the dew. Will you come to the bar Will you come to